Definitely played that this morning. Morgan. I feel like this is one of those days, not just one of those Fridays, but one of those days that champagne in the morning would have been okay.
It would have been okay. And we should have gotten a bottle. I'll be honest with you. We should have each gotten something, popped a little, on stream, celebrated. Yay!
Right?
Hi, everyone who's joining us this morning. The reason, if you're here, drop a hi in chat. We love to see you. The reason today's a celebration, Nick, it's number 50.
And episode 100 dropped today.
Whew. Big day, huh? Big day. 100 podcast episodes. 50 live shows, or this being our 50th live show. It's crazy. So thank you to everyone who's joining us this morning for this momentous occasion. And I do have to make a small plug. If you're here and you listen to the podcast and you're like, oh my God, there's 100 episodes. What are the ones that I really should listen to? The episode we released today talks you through that. So if you want some help filtering through 100 episodes, the podcast episode we released today, you can check it out on your favorite podcast stream app or on our site, and walks you through some of our favorite interviews that we've ever done. So go check it out. I have to say, there's so many interviews. It was funny. We each asked top threes, and we couldn't really narrow it down to three. So there's some good recommendations if you're looking for something to listen to later today on a walk, or while you're doing chores, or however you like to listen to your podcast. But today is our 50th live. So Nick, do you have a question for the day to kick us off?
Actually, I do. With today being such a big celebration, what is your favorite way to celebrate something big?
Ooh.
Morgan, what is your favorite way to celebrate something big? Is it a newly fashioned?
Newly fashions are good. My favorite is usually a meal out somewhere. A whole, sort of the ritual of going to a fancy restaurant and eating something delicious and having some drinks. But I think that the crucial part of that all is that you're with good people, right? It can't just be, I'm myself not just going to go out and have a nice meal to celebrate. I want people there with me. So
they're solo cutting your steak.
And honestly, I don't really eat that much steak anymore. But that might be a special occasion meal. That's true. How about everyone who's watching? What's your favorite way to celebrate? Drop it in chat. We want to see. Nick, for you?
So I'm the same. It's really, I think it's more about the people that you want to have around you for those moments than necessarily it is the activity. But the whole celebration of going out, getting that, organizing, getting those people out, and just enjoying the moment with everyone, because we all know how much effort goes into those big milestones, and it just feels like it's a nice way to cap it off with good energy with good people.
Greg dropped bourbon and cigars in chat. That sounds pretty nice, even if you're alone. That's a fun way to celebrate. I could be down for that.
Yeah, good whiskey, good bourbon.
I'd be down. All right, Nick. Today is a live show about live shows, right?
Yeah, but I think it's almost good to go and start with why. Why live shows? And so what I keep hearing, and you guys, some of you guys have messaged me about this that are on chat, I'm sure, is so my company runs endless webinars and then expect us to fill them, and then expect us to use canned messaging to go and follow up with them. And I'm not going to say the name of the company that I had an experience with, where I downloaded one of their ebooks because they had done a report, and the report was on where the industry was going the next 1 or 2 years. And then somehow magically got an SDR to go call me to ask me to buy their product. And I was like, I wanted to know where the future of the industry was going. How is that relevant to you trying to sell me shit.
Yeah.
And I think what went wrong is in this process, the company came first. And if I were to go and distill anything that we're going to talk about today, the biggest lesson that I learned from 50 live shows is when you put the customer first, when you put the buyer first, when you design that experience instead of let it happen ad hoc, everyone wins.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment you put the company first and what's easy for you guys and then try to go and fit the customer in is when you do webinar. I mean, is when you do email. I mean, when you don't do what's best for the customer and you don't take advantage of easy avenues. Like if we were to try to do this as a webinar, how many of you guys would be here? How
Right.
many of you guys would know we even exist? How many of you guys would still be here if we did follow-up emails to sell you shit that had no tie to what we were actually talking about?
Mm-hmm. And it's funny. I registered for an event the other day, and on LinkedIn, if you set up your events through a company page, pro tip, you can create a lead capture form, and you can't do that through personal accounts. It's just the way that LinkedIn, the platform, is set up. And when I registered for the event, they had a lead capture form. And I was like, man, I'm not looking forward to the follow up on this. Like, I'll hit a 10 because I want to see stuff, but I am not like game for what I know is going to happen. And I think so some of this gets talked about in the marketing world as like the MQL hamster wheel, the marketing qualified
Oh,
lead
he's taking
hamster
it
wheel.
there. Uh-oh. Here we go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. And it is this arguably, I'm not sure about it, predictable revenue model that basically is a numbers game, and that the more emails you can capture based on minimal intent, the more follow-up sequences you can send, therefore the more meetings you can potentially book, therefore the more deals that you can qualify, therefore the more pipeline that you can generate and close. And is that true? Maybe. Is it as true today as it was 10 years ago? Absolutely not. And this comes to maybe some of the like core thesis around live shows that I was thinking about in preparation of today, which
Ooh.
is when you run a webinar and you're trying to capture leads, you are trying to create a one-off experience, right? Because everybody's who signed on to a webinar, here are our panelists, here is our topic for today, here's what we're going to discuss. And the goal is to capture their information because then you can do follow-up sequences. Live shows are different. The fundamental question isn't how can I create on a webinar, the fundamental question is basically how can I create an hour's worth of valuable content that gets people to come so then we can follow up with them. The core thesis of a live show is how can I get them to come back
Mm-hmm.
of their own volition? How can I get them to come back? And if you think what Nick had brought up about designing the buyer's experience, designing the customer's experience, answering why should they come back leads you down a very different rabbit hole than why should they come once so we can follow up with them. And I hope, at least in some part, that you can see if you've come to a number of these how that informs the way we do content. We were kind of pulling back the curtain on the wizard here a little bit, but like I think about that every time we do a live. Nick, why should somebody come back if this is their first one or their 10th one? Why should they come back?
Here, I always thought you just, had like a little hat in the background. You're like, we're going to talk about LinkedIn lead gen. Woo!
Oh man, yeah, probably not. But the other thing that this orients you toward in the marketing world is more demand generation than demand capture, of course. But on social and doing live shows on social networks, whether that's LinkedIn or Twitter or TikTok or YouTube or whatever, I still think if you ask and answer the question, why should they come back? Your content strategy, your topic strategy, the ways that you are creating the live show all change. Because now it's not good enough just to deliver value, just to pull up a presentation and say, here are some things you need to know about our product. Because you know what's going to happen? You're going to have 100 people show up to the first one, and you're going to have 5 people show up to the next one. Like that's
Morgan.
right. Sorry, I'm
So,
on a rant.
no, it was good. I have a
Okay,
funny.
yeah, go for it, Nick.
So let's say I forgot my coffee outside my house, sitting right beside the car, and so I leave. So what does the marketing tell you? That's okay. Just throw them in a sequence. We'll get them at some point.
Mm,
What does modern sales and marketing, modern demand gen say? It's okay. They'll be back.
they'll be back.
So when would you rather talk to them? While you're trying to chase them when they're on a mission to do something else? Or would you rather hand them their coffee and be like, hey, you forgot this when they get home, excited to see you? And I think that's the whole point is mentally, are they in a headspace to accept the information? Or are you chasing them because it's on your time? I have to do this activity. I have to make this count. And that's what a lot of webinars force you into is, okay, so we got them here. Well, now we have to go and chase them down because if we don't chase them down, the company's going to fire me.
Yeah.
But if we flip it, like we said, to like, they're going to come back.
Mhm.
This was so good. They're going to come back. But that conversation's going to get better each time they come back to see us.
Well, and definitely today for everybody who's here is maybe a little more marketing focused than sales focused traditionally. But Nick, for our future audio listeners, is sort of shrugging. I think that the interesting combo move here is if there's an evangelist person at your company, or if you are the evangelist, because content gets you so far. I think content gets you actually pretty far in LinkedIn. Um, if you're running content as comments and engagement and posting, and you're interacting with the platform as designed,
Good clarification.
yes, you're going to get pretty far. But then the question becomes, if you have some level of credibility with an audience, your followers on your account, how can you take that and build on it without just, posting more or commenting more or sending more DMs? And one of the things that marketing, when done right, can do well is to build permission with events like this. The problem with events like this, usually, and you and I have attended a lot of them, is that they design them as one offs, they design them as webinars. So when you come to the one off webinar
The
hosted by your
one
favorite influencer,
the one webinar to rule them all.
right, it's Sauron's Ring version of a webinar, is you attend, and you, the influencer, the evangelist, the person who has an audience, is trying to build more permission or trying to build more visibility. But you're not, when you don't ask yourself, why should they come back? You deliver an experience that you can get a lot of people to once, but you can't get a lot of people to 10 times. And that's where running live shows, and it does, I mean, for us, it's every week, right? The Power Hour is every Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. Like that's our formula. It could be once a month, it could be twice a month, whatever that consistency is. The question becomes, how do I get them to come back? Because, and this is sort of the MO or the thinking from this from a marketing side, is your content and your comments on a social network, especially as in an evangelist role, build surface level credibility. But if you can win over somebody for an hour's worth of their time and you deliver a lot of value, well, and actually you build a lot of permission. So Seth Godin's, godfather of marketing's formula for permission is anticipated, personal, and relevant. So anticipated, it's like they're reading my mind. Personal, it's about me. Relevant, it's for me in this moment in time, right? When we deliver those things inside of a live show, suddenly it's like, wow, I want to come back to the next one. Or at least that's the hope in an evangelist role. Whereas if you continue on the webinars, The goal is not to build permission. The goal is to get their information so then you can do follow-up sequences and extract it all and throw it to a sales team or you as the seller evangelist to do that follow-up. Meanwhile, we're over here continuing just every Friday to build more, hopefully more and more permission, or anybody who's doing live shows, building more and more permission every time you run something. So then the 20th time somebody comes, they're like, wow, I love showing up to this. At least that's the goal. I hope. I hope most of you who are in attendance today actually like showing up to these. Anyways.
I like the pause there. Like,
Yeah.
well, I hope so.
I hope so. Oh gosh. I could continue to rant on this for a while, Nick. But
Oh, good. Just wanted to go in.
oh yes. So Nick, one of the things that we've experimented with is like trying to get more people to come to these. So, shall we pull back the curtain a little bit on how we are getting more people to come to these live shows and how others might be able to increase their audience?
You have to really ask yourself, why are they here?
Hmm.
And so when you cold call, one of the things I always used to train people is they're going to ask 3 questions as soon as they pick up the phone. Who are you? What do you want? And why should I care? The most commonly missed answer is, why should I care? So who's showing up? Why? What's in it for them? And why would they share it? And this is where, like, to get them to come back is so much bigger, because it's like product market fit in a company or referrals, or like, it's the experience is so good that people got so much value that they're like, I have to, like, they almost have this compulsion. They're like, it would almost be wrong if I didn't tell somebody about this because it's so good. And it's building that community around yourself of support that just doesn't exist. But the question you have to ask is, what is an easier route into the account? Where is the knowledge best experienced? So, would we be better off talking to VP of sales and talking high level strategy? Would we go after middle management, provide them the support that they just don't have or the training that doesn't exist or most companies don't deem relevant? Or do we talk to sellers like yourself, SDRs, AEs, and the mix to give you the knowledge you need to succeed? And if your company's not giving it to you, give you guys an asset that you can show the company so that we can support you.
Mhm.
None of these are wrong, but you have to make a choice. And this is one of the biggest failures I would say that we did at the start is we didn't make the choice. We didn't want to go and draw a line. We wanted to have more.
Mhm.
The problem was, because we weren't speaking to any one person, the value got lost. So how could I invite a VP of sales to, how to book a meeting with anyone on LinkedIn? Do they care? Probably not. They're not judged on it.
Right.
It's not really written into their roles and responsibilities. It might be of interest, but it's not a game changer for their career. And so, like, diving into, like, what is that internal motivation to do something? If I was really hungry to go and hit quota, I'm going to look for resources that will either work on my weaknesses or deliver a promise of more sales faster, whatever that looks like, right?
And I think if you, for anybody who wants to see validation of this in progress, because we do build in public here, you can probably look at our first 20, I think, episodes on the podcast. And it was like a mix of interviews and also like at least 12 or 15 of those are lives. And they're still great episodes. I love those episodes, but they do not feel as in line with our core value today as some of our recent lives. And that was because we were still trying to triangulate, okay, who exactly are we serving and why should they care? What is it about this live show compared to other people's content that will draw them in, that will be a magnet? And I can say with certainty, because we tracked the numbers, that when we actually nailed that core value, the attendance number over 10 live shows went like this. It just skyrocketed for our audio listeners in the future. It just jumped up,
Morgan's
right?
moving fingers.
Yeah. And that's because now you're able to differentiate. You're now able to say, not for you, yes for you, right? Speak to somebody in particular. And that's the I mean that's the magic of a great live, when you can nail content topics that match with what people are already talking about. And funny enough, we've talked about this on previous lives, like how to use social listening to develop your content. In this case, a content type is a live show. You could turn the same intelligence into great posts, into great comments, into little images or whatever. The live show is just a different format to evangelize and connect and build an audience.
Well, even Morgan, if we think of like intent. So a
Hmm.
lot of people speak about intent, like somebody looked at my profile, intent, I better go and reach out. Oh,
Hmm.
they looked at my website, intent, better go reach out. What if we took intent instead of an arbitrary stupid action that means literally
Nothing.
nothing? What if we took it to a concept, a proof of change that somebody's ready to go and look into the future? So what if you have an account and you know the roles and responsibilities of a certain persona, a job description, and you're like, what problem statement, what value, what regular pain is felt in this person's workflow or day would want, if they're ready to change, would bring them to this live show, to this webinar? And then you got to ask yourself, how do I introduce it to them?
Hmm.
What type of conversation do they need to hear for me to meet them where they're at instead of try to pull them where I need them to be? This is how sales uses webinars. Sales uses live shows and content, is the content fills the void and it challenges the way they see the world, or meets them when they're already realized they're problem aware and they're like, holy crap, I need to change this fast, but I don't know where to start. And so then it makes the conversation really easy because you've already got proof of change, proof that mentally they're ready to listen, especially if they listen to the whole episode. And so then it's like, what do you say next?
Hmm.
And how do you know out of the 100 people, 200, 500 people that you should talk to them? Is it because you guys are in the comments and your comments are showing proof of change, or that you're challenging the status quo? This is what sales is. If you read Challenger, it's all what it's about. But you can't force somebody to make a change they're not willing to make or that they don't see a problem. This is why most webinar and gated content tactics are useless
Anymore. In
anymore.
in 2012, when they were new and everybody was like, "What? You're going to follow up with me off of a webinar? Holy cow, that's so cool!" And then now 50 billion businesses do that every day. Like, it's not
Well, it's
as
also
useful.
access to information, right?
Hmm.
Back in 2012, a lot of the good content was sponsored and it was hidden
It was, yeah.
to justify the cost.
Hmm.
Where now it's so easy to go and do that, right? So it's like, okay, so think of that buyer's experience. How does this fit in?
What do they
Stop
want?
thinking about how do I get, because usually the question I hear when SDRs reach out to me is, how do I get them on the phone?
Hmm.
Why them? Why now?
And why the phone?
And the phone isn't even the big part, right?
No.
It's why them, why now? Different channels work for different personas, different industries. Some people, different personas in a company might be more on LinkedIn versus Reddit versus Facebook or Instagram, YouTube. But this is where the buying experience comes in, is where does it fit in? And why are you doing it with intention to align with their intent?
Yeah.
Why change? Hey, the phones and the email aren't working as well as they used to alone. So maybe I should set up triggers to go and see change. Maybe I should invite them to a live stream to see if they're willing and interested to consume the content and apply it. So what if I took that a step further and I guided them to apply it? So then if they're willing to do this and they're willing to bring people in the team in, do you think that's going to be a bigger sale or a smaller sale when they have internal buy-in? It's almost like they're a champion for the deal.
Hmm.
So one of the biggest differences one of the biggest differences, and you have to look at it this way, is live streams build champions. That's why they work.
Yep.
And when you look at the buyer experience, we're not way down the funnel. It's that champion enablement. It's that initial kickoff phase is where a lot of these live streams win. So how are we guiding those champions, thinking of the ones that we've worked with that have been amazing? How could we have helped them make a better decision? How could we help them get ready to go to the buying committee? How can we get them to trust us to bring us in sooner to support them, even if it's through content in the background? But this is such a bigger play than like,
Yeah.
the spray and pray, because you have intent, you have a strategy, and it comes down to why change? Why now?
Yeah, and I mean, that's where in many ways a good collab between sales and marketing to warm up accounts looks a lot like this. Because and especially if you're on social, like, or if you're a seller out on social, if you're warming up accounts, this is a great opportunity to invite said accounts to something relevant and interesting, and leveraging a live show to build trust and credibility before you do any outreach. And then layering on what Nick just said for prospecting triggers and why then, why now, to then guide your outreach. But instead of being so mechanized about it, where you're inviting your prospect list to the live show and then you're following up with every single person you invited to say, hey, did you see the live show? And then seeing what they say and trying to, strike up a conversation on and on and on. You're building trust simply by showing up. And then you're letting the conversations naturally guide who you're going after and why, which is different. I mean, I'll say this even as somebody who hasn't been, like, I don't know, a seller in SaaS, but I've had to sell. This is uncomfortable for me in some ways. Like, I I always wonder, like, should we do more targeted, direct sequence follow-ups, right? Like that, it's something that's crossed my mind. Of course, it's like, how much are we doing follow-ups? And then what I realized when we held off on that, and we realized that what mattered was answering why should they come back. We started to just create content that got people to come back. Maybe all of you who are joining us today, right? And who have joined previous live shows. And some of that is the content, the value that's being delivered. Some of that is the experience, right? It's more than just us sitting here as talking heads delivering you value. Like, we do try and have a little fun. I don't know. Um, but that what you're doing is, instead of doing direct outreach, you're creating magnets in many ways of credibility and attention. You're drawing people in to learn from an evangelist, to learn from somebody at your company or yourself, in order to build that relationship and connection with your ICP. And the craziest part is, you never have to send an email to do it if you do it right. And if you answer that question, why should they come back?
So I thought, just kind of tag into this too. When you register for an event, you have access to all of the attendees with a message. It goes into a different inbox where they have to accept it, but you have open access to send them messages.
Mm-hmm.
Use it wisely so it doesn't turn into an in-mail,
Mm-hmm.
where it's just an unsolicited pitch that doesn't answer why them, why now. Without context, it doesn't mean anything. It just is selfish. But maybe selfishly, maybe not. You know what I thought we would do would be fun for the next little bit?
Hmm.
The best way to learn, other than to make mistakes yourself, is to listen to everybody else's mistakes. So,
Uh-huh.
Morgan,
Yep.
what is the biggest oops we've had
Ooh.
running our live show?
What? I don't know. I thought of like five different. I mean, obviously, not inviting people when you're first starting out is a big oops. Um, what came to your mind on this? I'm interested what you think our big mistake was.
So, one part is when we first started, I thought the event was it.
Hmm.
I thought it was a solo act, and I didn't string them together. and think of the experience over 4 to 6 shows, because that's normally what happens is when people reach out, it's usually a sequence of 4 to 6. Usually that's all it is 4 to 6 shows, and they start hitting our DMs, asking questions, and then they jump into the comments and they become really dynamic audience members. And before, I thought it was that webinar mentality of one and done.
Mm.
And so I just never put them together. And I also didn't consider the distribution. So anybody that has heard us talk about this before, we forgot to go and promote the podcast for quite a
Solid.
few months.
I was going to say a solid couple of months. We just kind of, wasn't a big deal.
And because we didn't do that, we missed really big opportunities to go and like splice this up and send it out. So you guys just got the juicy bits on LinkedIn or on wherever else other channel you're on. And it made the investment a lot less. It was like the iceberg. We had the tip of the iceberg and we just left the rest untapped.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back now, I wish we would have done this sooner, because holy man, it's a lot more work to go back and go and finish the project than do it as you
I
go.
I think honestly, one of the mistakes I felt early on, I, and this is more like an extracted lesson than there's not like a moment in which we did this consciously. I mean, to some degree, earlier this year or around the turn of the year, we did, but I think there's a difference between creating content for yourself and creating content for your audience. And oftentimes it's a Venn diagram, right? And I think we were sitting pretty squarely in the Venn diagram in which we knew there was some content we were producing that was fun for us to talk about and that also our audience would benefit from. But we didn't ever really go into the side of the diagram that was just audience and not necessarily content that we talked about or felt comfortable with. So I think when we started pushing ourselves to learn and experiment and talk about some of the things and bring on guests and have live shows with people who sit outside our core area, but also still speak to the same audience pains, that was really when we started to see some traction. And that was especially from the blend of the podcast and the live show. And even in the last month plus of bringing on more guests during the weeks for live shows, I think we've seen a lot of attention and resonance from that. So I think one of the things I wish I could go back was like take a week and really map out what are the main topics or lists and pain points and tie them together that your audience has. What are some of the things you can speak to today? And then what are some of the things that you want to speak to or should speak to, but have no idea how to tackle those? And either find people or learn them or build in public or however. Because that I felt was a major mistake in those first 20. We were talking a lot more to our comfort side than to the audience side, basically, which
I'm
is
gonna pull
fine.
up.
Lesson learned.
I'm gonna pull up this comment because this is something we experimented with and led to a few oopses and a few ahs. When you go live, do you record on your infrastructure in the background and then edit and convert to a podcast format? Yes. So we've experimented with a lot of different software.
Mm-hmm.
Restream has really good video and audio capture that does not require as much finessing on the back end, although that's definitely a Morgan question, because
Yeah.
I don't know.
Didn't interact. So if I understand this question correctly, there might be a second layer to this, which is like, do we hit record on our own recording software on top of what we're streaming? And the answer to that is no. We are only recording through the streaming suite. And that's because we're both very confident in the quality that our streaming suite provides. Like Restream is awesome, and I think better in terms of quality than a lot of its competitors. In terms of actually editing that, then yes, we just sort of pull down. I mean, there's a whole repurposing thing. And if you follow us, you'll see our content repurposed from live shows and podcast interviews. So some of that's going on in the background on top of converting it and editing it into a podcast format, which essentially just becomes a template if you do a lot of these that you plug and play with. So the reason for me that live streaming suites or using something dedicated for live streaming like Restream with really high quality is that the ultimate file that's produced is a lot higher quality in terms of audio, particularly than something like a Zoom or
Oh, and then the
a
audio
standard.
sync on Zoom too. Like how many times,
We've
especially
run
if you're
into those
going
issues.
live.
Yep.
Oh,
Yep. So and it's not a bad thing to use Zoom, but for us, it we wanted to be able to get more legs out of the live shows, and particularly into podcasts, we want it to be really high quality. So this sort of met our needs. If we were not doing, I mean, a lot of our podcast interviews were actually using Riverside, which is like a dedicated recording studio, and the
that's
quality out of
really
Riverside
good.
is insane. um, it is worth every penny you spend with them because of the way it's set up, and the quality of the recording through that is awesome. It's just they don't stream basic, and we've tried. If you find, even recently on my feed, I had a joke post that we tried streaming through Riverside, and it just didn't work out as well, despite the quality being really high.
Yeah, we didn't get the community vibe because we didn't have access to the comments, so we could go and
Hmm.
engage with you guys. So great,
Yep.
great software, really high quality. Just having the community vibe if you want to have comments, because comments is where you learn. Comments is where you see further down the funnel the questions people have. So I definitely highly recommend something that makes comments easy.
Hmm.
And that leads to another,
Jacobs.
yeah.
Uh-huh. uh
Oh, what happened?
hmm. There we go.
That was weird.
So Jacob asks, when did you guys know you were ready to start a live show, and what does it take? Were we ready for a live show, Nick? I don't know.
You know what,
Huh.
Morgan? We
Yeah.
haven't really told this story too much.
It's true. It's true. It could be time.
What, how did this start?
So many, many moons ago, Nick and I had connected, and we talked a little bit about this on today's podcast episode. And we started to have weekly industry therapy sessions because he was in B2B, I was in B2B, and we were talking about all this stuff that was weird, basically. Because I come from direct to consumer brand strategy. Like I was in the B2C world for a long time. So coming over to B2B was like stepping back in time, like 10 to 15 years. And Nick and I connected about and just like started doing public therapy or therapy sessions together over Zoom and just talking about like what's going on in the industry and connecting on that. And I don't recall who, I don't know if you recall who. Basically, we're like, what if we just did a live show on this on like a topic? And uh it was for like half an hour. So we started
NSYNC
this.
TV.
We started this thing called InSync TV, which is buried somewhere in the algorithm. It does not look anything like this. We've learned our lesson. And I think we did that for like 4 to 6 weeks, I think.
Yeah,
I think it was a number of weeks that we were doing that.
because
And
we committed to 2 months or something, or six
yeah,
weeks, and you're like, we'll try this. We'll see what happens. I'm going to Greg's comment. Are you ever ready? We were not ready.
we were not ready.
We were not ready.
um, the the main thing, honestly, is that we were listening to the market in those first 6 episodes. And what we learned was that we needed to dial in the brand, we needed to dial in what we were talking about. All of the lessons that we shared at the beginning of the hour were sort of early lessons for us. And thus the B2B Power Hour was born. And we've done 50 live shows under this brand since, which is crazy.
We did start with Zoom, and then
Yes.
we tried a bunch of different software. Didn't like the experience, and then stumbled upon Restream. Ended
Hmm.
up upgrading our package to get better video,
Yeah.
and honestly, it was the best investment.
Truly. Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think the main lesson I took away from that early experience, um, and Chris had just commented this, was that we learned really quickly what worked and what didn't.
And how
Like,
to articulate things.
man, talk about real time learning. So yeah, it's like a tension or a balance, I think, upon reflection of like, are you ready, or how prepared should you be? Well, I mean, you got to talk about something for an hour. Okay. You want to create that experience,
Do you remember how we
but
started writing it all out? Well,
but
we never like scripted anything.
No,
We used to spend
a lot of time.
a lot of I can't even put a number on it, where we'd build out a structure to go and talk through it, like topics, subtopics, questions, like some like getting into some of the details,
Hmm.
but it lost the conversational flow.
Hmm.
There wasn't really as much laughing and like joking around, because it was like, Morgan, shut up. We have to hit the timing. If you go into this too long, then we can't get to the
Me,
next
I'm
topic.
rambling on the side about something. Yeah. So, but now I think like there's the balance that we have is like the live shows that we're doing on Fridays are topics that we're well versed in and that we're creating content and doing listening through the whole week. So preparation is happening in real time. It's just not happening in a document necessarily. And today I think we definitely continue to try and learn and refine off of these topics, right? Like we are listening in real time what's resonating and what's not, and looking at engagement numbers and piecing apart the data and trends. Never like one episode, because one episode alone doesn't tell you much. But if you do six and episode four blew it out of the water, that might actually tell you something. And maybe there's a lot of factors that go into that, but that can illustrate some important lessons when you start constructing trends over time to see which ones are above trend or below trend.
That's super critical, because how many times did we think something was important and we had to work to get it out into the world?
Hmm.
And there's other ones like the profile reviews and like how to book a meeting with anyone on LinkedIn, that we had to not turn people away, but it was like, what happened?
Yeah.
And it had extreme reach.
Hmm.
And that's when you know you stumble upon gold, is when you'll start to see stuff run away. And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
how are so many people hearing about this? What about, and then you can start deconstructing, but that only happens if you take risks and you do enough. So
Hmm.
I don't know who said it earlier. Is it a long game? It it's kind of everything. In the short term, you're trying to figure out how to be ready, what to use, how to get people there. Midterm is how do you get them to come back?
Hmm.
And the long term is how do we continuously keep learning so the experience only gets better with time? And
And I think some of this illustrates even to the topic of today of like some fundamental philosophical differences between doing live shows and doing webinars, in which like a webinar can be informative and it can be uh, instructive or educational. But again, if you have a list of 1,000 people and you invite them all to a webinar, you'll get some bites. But then if you invite those same people to a second webinar, what's the value? If it's the same topic, you're definitely not going to get the same people. If it's a different topic, was the experience on the first webinar good enough for them to come back? And some companies have mastered this. I do know a few companies that do like 4-part or 6-part webinar series, and it's a whole package thing. But that's like a packaging strategy layered on top of your webinars. But then it's a one off. And then you still go into the email follow up sequences and you try and sell and close after the 6-part is done. This live show thing is demand generation. You're trying to reach new audiences with value so that they come back again and again. And for me, I think part of the reason we're listening to the market so much is not just because we want more people to show up. The numbers alone are not the reason we do this. We want to find the right people to show up and then have good conversations with them to build trust. One of the graphics I think we had put out recently was like the change in pipeline. So when you're doing social selling, the time from first touch to qualified deal is a lot longer than in traditional sales because of things like this. Like you're trying to build trust and you're doing everything the traditional salesperson does in pipeline. You're doing it pre-pipeline. You're building trust, credibility, demonstrating value, all of the things that are required to close the sale. You're doing it before they get into your pipeline. And that's where live shows can help come in, where it's like real-time permission building, the layer on top of your credibility layer that gets people excited to attend and to come back.
so a lot of you guys use sales engagement platforms, outreach. and many, many others.
Mm.
But there's a feature in there that they encourage triples. Triples are quads. So when something gets viewed 3 times, it's an open. When it's 4, it's high intent. If it's more, it's probably getting shared. Think about this when you're looking at this whole thing as a buyer experience. With webinars and live shows, what's your triple?
Hmm.
What is your golden egg perfect scenario where it's the same as that it's the perfect time to reach out? You can automate this too, that you get a trigger, not just necessarily send out a message. Is how do you get alerted? How do you go and find this? So like if you invite someone 3 times to a webinar and they show up to every one, how much smaller is that list than the whole list?
Yeah.
But this is when you work smarter, not harder. Nobody in sales, no, I don't know how to phrase this properly. Everybody except for stupid managers said that sales is all about working hard. You got to put the work in at the start to build the pattern recognition,
Mm-hmm.
but it's about working smart. And smart sellers build layers. Think of them like products. So cold calling is a product. When you're calling out, what do you get from that? What is the input versus the output versus the input? Like what's the result? What's the ROI? What is your objective and what do you get from it? Is it worth the time you're putting in? And you rotate because this changes over time. So what are those layers that you're investing in? What are your top 3 that are your go-to rainmakers?
Mm-hmm.
Is it commenting on LinkedIn? Is it your company's live show webinar? Is it your sales nav triggers that you got set up for, like somebody just got a promotion, somebody just did a funding round? But all of these are the triggers that drive it home. It really answers the why change, why now. And then you've earned the right to say why you
Mm-hmm.
after vampire sales. But
Mm-hmm.
this is how you have to think about is what are your layers? Stop thinking about accounts. Stop thinking about people. Stop thinking about bullshit activities. Think of yourself like a business. You own a franchise. Would you buy a shit franchise? No, then don't work for a shitty company.
Yep.
Look at the resources that your company's providing. Look at what their entire setup is like. That is what you're buying into when you get hired. All of you guys here are great sellers.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the right mindset because you're learning. So how do you find the right franchise? Well, you're probably at a good franchise. You're just not fully utilizing the resources to be the best that you can. And so if we get out of the reactance of like, oh, I need to go, oh, I need to go, oh, I need to go, and you start time blocking and layer in and think of them like products. If I invest an hour, does my hourly rate go up, stay the same, or go down?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're going to get your set salary.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not making commission and you're staying the same or going down, now your job's on the line as well.
And honestly, if keeping with this analogy, the main lesson that I think we've both learned is that running the traditional follow up sequences on social from a live show means your hourly rate goes way, way, way down.
And your stress goes way, 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 way,
Up.
way up. How do I track all of this? Why?
Why? Don't. It doesn't matter. You're on social.
So
Like,
guys, when you're cold calling, who would you rather lead with in the morning? Would you rather lead your cold calls with warm accounts that pick up the phone? People that you can have a conversation with? Hopefully they're not talkers though. And they're mobilizers, but who would you rather start with? This is what happens in sales is we get caught up in the activities, but we don't prioritize activities. We don't know which activity drives home results consistently, and we don't put them in that order. But that's also accounts. So this whole strategy is giving you ways to prioritize accounts in individuals. So when you do outreach, it doesn't need to be 100 brand new pieces of outreach. You can stagger it so that you're doing, hey, I know these people went and attended the last 3
mhm.
webinars. Now you have context.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I saw that you attended our last 3 webinars. What do you want to know?
Mm-hmm.
What might be going through their head? What's next in the buying experience? This is when we move from commodity sellers to consultants. Is we are using our brain instead of just doing monotonous activities. And I know it's so easy to get in there, especially when your quota's running away from you. But this is how we go further, is we start to really look at how we're investing our time and also align the investment with the best buying experience.
Well, and it all comes back to the buying experience, because if I was a buyer and I attended somebody's live show and they were really good, and so I came back to the second one and it was also really good, and I came back to a third one and I was like, all right, I'm going to make some time for this because this is actually really important. I skipped the fourth one because I have a calendar conflict. Come back to the fifth one, it's really good. And I'm engaging. Then I'm like, okay, I'm going to make sure to follow these guys, click the bell or whatever. And then I comment. Suddenly, if I get a DM from the host that says, man, I love that you're engaging in this stuff. Thanks for coming to the live shows. I've seen you in the comments, and asks a provocative question. That is very different than me showing up to one live show, having an email capture, and them following up saying, hey, whether or not I attended, saw you attended our last webinar, our last live show. Can I sell you something? Basically, is going to be the pitch. Those are two very different buying experiences. And the point is to orient our sales process to the buying experience that people want, right? And nowadays, as Greg had just commented, you weren't pitched in the first 7 seconds is very much part of buyers' preferences because there's so much noise and everybody gets pitched all the time. This is what is called permission building, right? That layer on top. You are building permission with somebody, trust with somebody to reach out and say, hey, what's going on? And this is all social. The other thing that Nick brought up earlier, which I don't want to gloss over, I don't understand why we're so obsessed with trying to track every single little activity on LinkedIn. Like if we think about it,
I
if you
can
go
tell you
to a
why.
well, I mean, I can tell you why, but I don't understand the strategic importance of it, because if you go to a conference with 500 people, do you measure the number of business cards you get? Like, come on. That's not a predictor of your success. Or the number of handshakes you have, that's not a predictor of your success. Or the number of chats over drinks you have, that's not really a predictor of your success. I mean, that last one is a little bit closer. But the I mean, especially if it's with your target ICP and it's a good conversation. But the point is, on LinkedIn, it's no different than an in-person conference. We just all happen to have digital profiles and we all interact digitally. So releasing ourselves from a sales process that serves us instead of our buyers allows us to create a buying experience on social that aligns with their preferences. And that means all you're looking for are who's showing up and how can I engage with them.
And guys, like what Morgan's saying that is even more important that we just don't get taught as sellers is this mentality is scalable. The
Mm-hmm.
only way the other mentality is scalable is through automation and sequences.
Yes.
So would you rather, you're casting out a line fishing, and every single time somebody picks up the phone, you're trying to reel them in, you got 7 or 8 of them you're trying to reel in, and you're trying to pull them through the buyer's journey because they're not ready because you just called them out of the frickin' blue? Or would you rather have assets like live shows, newsletters, all these different pieces, content, networking, whatever it is, that you're engaging from afar, but no longer are you doing it, I'm not just talking to Morgan, I'm talking to thousands of other people, and if you give it a place that can stay where it can spread, now you have even more reach and more possibilities that relevant insight will go and do something.
I want to take a step back because I know we're about 6 minutes out, and I want to make an important note. How about a strategic note about perseverance? There's The methodology that I use, we use this internally, so feel free to steal this. This is not something I came up with. Is we make bets,
Mm,
and a bet has a circuit breaker. A bet has a start and an end. Okay, so on this Instinct TV thing we did originally, it was a 6-week bet or an 8-week bet or whatever. And the point is you make the bet. You say I'm going to do XYZ for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever. And at the end of those 10 weeks, there is no sunk cost. I'm done. Okay, it doesn't matter. I just made a bet. Don't ignore the sunk costs. It's a fallacy anyways. We struggle with it. We The point is to make a bet for a set amount of time and see what you can learn from it. Because potentially there are lots of reasons why a live show doesn't work immediately or will not work in your industry. And we're happy to acquiesce that. The point is to not give up too soon. So instead of saying I'm going to start a live show and then after your first 3 when it kind of doesn't go anywhere like ours didn't, then you give up and you never, right? But with a strategic bet, you say, I'm going to spend 10 weeks doing this, or I'm going to do 10 live shows over 4 months, or whatever that bet is. All you're doing is you're committing to the output and you're seeing what you can learn and how you can make it better. And at the end of that bet, at the end of the 10 weeks, the 10 whatever, you say, all right, should I continue? And if the answer is no, if you're not getting any results from it, don't continue. It was just a bet, and not all bets pay off. Not every
you
time does the roulette wheel land on red 17, right? It's
live
just
and
not
learn.
always going to happen. And that's fine. Don't don't stop too soon, but also don't carry out something that isn't generating anything for you.
Everything's an investment. And
Yep.
Greg is kind of capping us off with like the big question to answer, like to rule them all here. So, is this a generational issue, both in the seller and buyer world? Do I evangelize or do I write off a generational segment? So, all I'm going to say is the one thing I've learned in sales in the past 3 years that I, funny enough, never learned in the other years that came before that is now with change, like why change, why now? When somebody's mentally not ready to change, it's like calling the wrong persona that never sees the problem.
Mm,
And like talking to VPs in certain levels, they may have bought the problem. They might believe in the problem that it's not a problem. And so where is the investment better spent is really the question is where's my time best spent? And who's it best spent talking to? And what is it best spent talking about? Sales is all conversations. The right conversation with the right person at the right time and the right message.
mhm,
When you dial all that in and then have those layers of conversations, that's how we hit volume. That's how we exceed quota. That's how we get President's Club. And so you can have an evangelism as like 20% because you're stubborn and you want to make it happen. I get it because I'm stubborn too. And sometimes I just want to see it through. Hey, Morgan,
Yep.
when you know you're right, you're
Yep.
right.
Yep.
Sometimes it's just how you feel. But would you bet your career on it? And this is what happens when we don't have enough layers is we bet too much on one thing that's not paying off. And it's
Mhm,
like how many people lost their retirement to the stock market? Why? They bet only on one thing or they thought they had enough but they didn't. And so the question you need to ask yourself isn't what's that one thing? Because a lot of sellers we get good at just one thing and that's kind of all we do. But why don't you have layers of things that produce different consistency? Why don't we go and invest into those and invest into the right personas? Because then we don't have to fight this uphill battle with idiots people that just don't get it. Because who's really the idiot when we go and think about this? If we're fighting somebody that doesn't see a problem, we can't control them. It'll frustrate the hell out of us, but
mhm,
we can't control them.
mhm,
But what we can control is who we call and who we contact and what prep we do before we have that conversation. And if there's no signs of change or there's no signs of anything, what would you rather do? Signs of change in proven strategies because you've measured long enough to know they're working better than average.
Yep.
You know what happens when the circuit breaker hits and they're not better than average?
You're done.
like think of like sports teams.
Yeah.
Somebody's past their prime. What do?
Yeah.
They retire. Just
Mhm.
retire it. No
Mhm.
harm, no foul. You can talk about how great it was back in the day,
Yeah.
but move on to the next one.
Exactly. All right, folks, we are at the end of this power hour. Thank you all for joining today. If you have more questions, if you want to talk more live show stuff, please DM us, connect with us. We'd love to chat. Or if you have questions about other stuff in the sales process, you know where we are. We do these every Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. Next week's is going to be a doozy, so make sure you follow along for a great, great set of content. And just like for everyone who's here, who maybe didn't catch the front end, today was our 100th episode on the podcast. So go check that out. You can find B2B Power Hour wherever you find podcasts, or you can go to our site, b2bpowerhour.com, to check it out. There's a lot of great interviews, and today's episode is sort of a summary of some of our favorites. So check that out if you want to find some more content that maybe isn't live show related, but there's some great ones there. So
And some birdie told me there might be a new intro outro coming soon. So
yeah, if you guys don't
uh,
follow along, we've got some fun stuff coming.
and we'd love to hear your opinion.
Yep.
And as you guys know, it's 2022. No seller should ever have to suffer in silence. If you need help, if you feel like the world's ending, if you feel like you're not getting the support you deserve or you need, shoot us a DM, shoot us a connect request, let us know what's going on. We'll support you. You don't have to buy anything. We
Mhm.
just want to see you be the best you can. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you being here.
Thanks. Happy Friday.
Happy